Today's recipe doesn't involve food, but instead involves some preserved and dried florals, so you can make an arrangement just like this for your home with whatever you can find, and it looks pretty good and bright on a wall, so I'm going to show you just how I did it. Instead of doing the normal food in a kitchen, we're gonna work on something a little bit more fun and crafty, and I just think of it as creative today in the kitchen, and that is a fall arrangement. Now I know you're thinking, I am not gonna put a fall arrangement today. This is to give you maybe the idea, maybe the hope, maybe the inspiration to think you can do this too. You know, we often maybe go to a craft store, go to a big box place even, that has all those sections of even like dried florals. You walk past them. I personally like the smell of a dried floral, not the silk ones, but like the preserved dried florals. And you kind of are like, oh, those are pretty, but what am I gonna do with them? Today is all about what we're gonna do with them. So what I have here in front of me are some different components of what I'm gonna use to make pretty much a fall wreath or wall hanging. I'm using a basket. So I want you to realize that you can do this in anything, whether it's a centerpiece on a table, whether it's a grapevine wreath, or something like this. I picked this up at a garage sale a couple weeks ago for $5. It was $5, which to me was a great deal because it's really sturdy and I like it. You can hang it on a door, you can hang it on a wall. And I think it's a lost art. You know, this was huge when I was growing up, the 80s and 90s. And I really got into it for a while. And then it kind of fell out of fashion. But now I feel like these dried florals are making a comeback. So instead of using foam in here, because we need something to hold in all the stems we're gonna put in, I'm gonna jam in enough that eventually they'll hold themselves a little bit, but I don't wanna use foam. It's really bad on the environment. It really isn't just a great, you can't reuse it, but what I am gonna use is some chicken wire. So I went out to my shed, cut this down to a small piece. I'm just gonna bend it and manipulate it until I can get it just right inside of here, which it's a basket, so it will take a minute. But what this does, and you're gonna see this pretty quickly, it acts almost like a flower frog. So what you have are all these holes that we can start putting stems through that are gonna hold it. And notice I'm keeping it out a little bit above the opening because I wanna be able to layer. So the first thing you wanna think is, where are you gonna hang this? You need to think of your space, whether it's a door, because you're only gonna have so much width, maybe a standard 36-inch door, something like that. Or if you have a big wall, you can make this like a big spray and get really big. So know your space, check it, hang it without anything, so you can somewhat measure beside it to know. What we're gonna start with is, I break things into two parts. I have my fillers, which you can see here, the textures and the muted colors of autumn I'm picking. We have preserved eucalyptus, this was a seeded eucalyptus without the seeds. We have traditional eucalyptus. We have different grasses with their plumes on them, crispedias. And then we have over here the more, I'm gonna call them pricier options. So I mix it in to less and more. So these are beautiful dried florals that I love. They're preserved real floral and they have the stem on them still. And then I went out to my garden, forage. Oftentimes I'll use dried hydrangeas. That's a great thing, but I've used so many of them. I have wreaths with them. I wanna do something different. So you could even go out to your garden. I went out and I love to dry my okra later on when I'm done picking it, and you can use that. See, it dries beautifully and the seeds dry in it, and you can use this as picks and things. I don't know if I'll use it today or not, but I like to show an option. So what I wanna start with, I'm gonna try to do it towards the camera here so you can see, are pieces of the eucalyptus, because it's usually the cheapest and most readily available. And I'll have to cut it somewhat to size, and you may have to cut off some of the stems, so the side stems, so it fits down in. But what you can start with is trying to just jam it in. Do you see how this holds it right away? And you can even try to twist it in, and then it's just set in place. The one thing I think you always need to think when you're starting to do this, don't right away think of symmetry. Don't think of perfection in a spray, because it begins to look like a funeral spray then, of straight up going outwards and fanning out. That can be a little bit too much like a funeral. So what we're gonna do is try to be a little bit more off center, a little bit haphazard, but start with filling in the eucalyptus. So what you're seeing now is I'm starting to layer with other fillers. These are all fillers that you can just find in the same section usually with the eucalyptus. Different preserved leaves. Obviously they're dyed or colored. They don't always hold their color, so that's why even eucalyptus is dyed. But what you can see is I'm kind of going more with a two-sided approach. The center is having a little bit lower, so it doesn't feel like I'm just starting high and going like a pyramid down on each side or a triangle. And it's getting a little bit more of that nice layered coloring as I'm working outwards. So I start with kind of the bigger things that are gonna take up the most space in the back, like the eucalyptus. And then I'll put smaller pieces as we go down so it feels more uniform. This is one of those things that I'm gonna admit, it seems complicated kind of when you explain it, but it's more just a process of having the items in front of you and slowly going through and filling in. And every so often, just like on a Christmas tree, I don't know if you're gonna get this, you hold it up, you even hold it away from you, and you start looking at it and thinking, what is it missing? So as I'm working towards the front, you can see I'm getting slightly lower, so it continues to kind of have a stair-stepped, layered look. And that's then when you can start filling in with some people. What they would do, and I think this can work well, is they take the filler pieces and they'll fill all over the item first. So they'll put tons of filler all over. That way, you know everything is covered to cover up all of your wire. I like to more see a little bit of it as I'm working through just to make sure, but it kind of works like with whatever you want. So as I'm layering, what I am gonna do is pick up some different things like these colored grasses. Now, these obviously, like I said, they're colored, and I like these in sections of 3. So the one thing you have to think about, some people call this an old design kind of thing, and I don't think you really should ever follow rules. But when you have 3 of something, an odd number is a little bit more pleasing to your eye. So instead of just sticking 1 every so often, having groupings of 3 or 5 of something that sticks out is going to be a little bit more impactful, and it makes you feel more comfortable seeing 3 or 5 of them as opposed to an even number. 4 just feels off. So when I put something like this in that's visually impactful, I'm always going to make sure I pick 3 or 5 so they can go in together, and that way you really get a nice impact of them too. And I like varying heights of them, and I just kind of give them a slight cut somewhere that I can then just take all 3. You could wire these together, but you don't have to. Now you also have to think of where you're going to hang this. Things that are colored like this, if they get wet, if they're in the elements, they could run, their colors could run, they don't hold up. This is gonna be better on preserved items usually, underneath a covered porch if you're gonna do it outside or something like that. So I'm gonna keep layering until we get towards the front of some of the more unique stuff and show how we can fill that in. You can see that the layering is just continuing. We're getting more of the coloring trying to be somewhat even so you don't get it just on one side. I'm keeping the center still slightly open with more of a spray out the 2 sides because of some of the bigger things I want to put in. So until I completely fill in all the gaps, I want to start putting in what I call more my main attraction items. So I always like when I'm doing something like this, if you would just fill it in with all the filler, it's pretty and it has a nice kind of autumnal look, but it doesn't really have anything cohesive that ties it all together. So that's what we're going to work on now, is the cohesiveness of what can do that. So that's when I start going for some bigger, impactful things I like to put at the end so they more stick out. And that's what's going to also fill in these gaps that I've been creating. Now, the size-wise, I'm going to kind of test if I need to, but do you see how instantly these bigger pieces have such a nice appeal? And what I really want to do is show almost this centerpiece with all of these. Now, if they have a wonky stem, that's why you have a good pruners or secateurs here that you would use outside, because it easily cuts through a lot of this preserved stuff. And that's what you want to make sure you can do. So I'm going to start sticking all of these in. Do you see how simple that is? And it, to me, really starts creating this impactful feeling of a centerpiece with it, and kind of shows why you were, see how I can even manipulate this to stay upright and tall because of that chicken wire. You know, once you start working with something like chicken wire, you easily stop thinking about the foam that you used to use. And do you see how all these together are creating such a more kind of visual appeal here in the center? And yet their colors are all going perfectly with everything else. And I like how they almost act as a bow would have. If we had a big bow for Christmas, you know, you would fill in at the center with a bow. These are creating that same effect, but they also blend in with the color. So I'm gonna put a few more of those in, and I might finish it. We may see, I might cut up one of these pieces of okra. I can do it with you here quick and see. Okra to me, it's really, it sounds odd, but when it dries, it's beautiful because the pods you can take and you can use them even on a wreath if you want to. I'm gonna cut off one of the pods. Once they're dry, they're just really pretty because they kind of continue to be really autumnal. So I thought a piece of the okra up here, there's always it's kind of fun to have a surprising element that you wouldn't expect. So I'm gonna work on getting that down in the chicken wire a little bit better, and we'll see how it's looking. So you can see I filled in with all the beautiful flowers. I even put the piece of okra up here. I cut it down and made it go a little lower. So to make the okra make sense, because as it dries, they're all gonna end up looking like this, I started putting just a few individual okra, what they're all gonna look like, in different places. So it's kind of popping out a couple places, but there's only one central piece of it, which I like. And then in front here, I even started filling in with a couple pieces of eucalyptus, and I put a few within all these dried florals in the center, so it, you know, really cohesively brought everything together. At the very end, what I've been doing is just for whimsy's sake, adding a few of these really small kind of dainty dried flowers because I think they kind of just add this nice little touch. They kind of dance, I feel like, if you know what I mean. They kind of just move around and offer a little bit of whimsy, which I think is important. You know, the whole point of this is to be fun, is to have fun and to make something that you're gonna enjoy because this is preserved. If you take care of it, keep it covered if it's outside, or just use it indoors, it should last for years that you should be able to use it. Now, when I'm not using one of these, I will say, to protect them and keep them looking good and not getting too much dust on them because they're hard to clean, I cover them. So put them inside of either something, a big plastic tub, or put a big garment bag over them, something like that, that will keep the dust off them year round because you're usually only going to use it, a few months out of the year. And that to me is what's important. So what I want to do now is go look what it would look like maybe in front of a wall. I think we should go see how it would look hanging somewhere because the backdrop of a kitchen doesn't necessarily show it off best. So let's go take a gander. I'm upstairs in my unfinished space that's still a little bit in construction, but it's a nice blank space for you to see kind of where I want to put it and the type of space I want it to be in. So this is a hanging one. So you can see right here against this wall, look how much it showcases. The colors actually pop much more than you think they will. And they're but very autumnal. So you have all that beautiful autumnal coloring and feeling and texture, and it really makes things like the red pop, the orange and yellow really stand out. And it ends up being just a really nice arrangement. And this is one that you can make fit for any space, If you have different coloring you want to go for, if you want to put in some dried gourds or something, or you could get some faux gourds and be able to pick them in kind of, it all will work out. So I hope this is something that kind of inspires you, something that makes you think outside the box, that makes you think of something different to do. Maybe a project to do with kids, with friends, maybe yourself. I just love to zone out to this sometimes on an evening and be able just to be creative. It's good to get our minds working. It's like a muscle that comes back. So if you agree, please share this video around. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for tips, for tricks, but also for tons of recipes to make you feel in the season just like hopefully this does.